This is the Inspired Focus podcast, and I'm your host, Jamie O'Connor. And this episode today with Kehla G is so incredible. I had so much fun recording with her. It's very different from any of the other episodes that I've done. We actually go into some foundational stuff around human design and the gene keys, and it is such a valuable resource. We go into looking at a little bit of my chart to give you guys an idea, like some real depth of what this is all about and what the tool is. And it is just so much gold. So I am really excited for you guys to listen and absorb her knowledge and hear more about human design and the gene keys. If you are interested in breath work or learning more about how breath work can be transformational in your life, please check out my breathwork experience and my membership that is at breathwork.inspiredfocus.co. It is a very reasonable $27 a month, or you can join the monthly sessions for $47. So that's at breathwork.inspiredfocus.co. And don't forget that we have openings still for Baja Flourish, our incredible retreat that is all about stepping into your most self-authored leadership roles, creating success on your terms, and becoming the leader that is truly embodying your purpose. I have recently changed the pricing to be more energetically aligned with what I believe is right for the retreat. And I have also added a pricing level for those who may not be able to afford the full price, but are really, really, really ready to step into their next level. And it is a pay it forward energetic commitment that does have a price associated with it, but is there for you if you're ready and you need a little bit of help. It's kind of like a scholarship, but on the honor system. So if you want to learn more about that, please check it out at flourishbaja.com. I'd love to have you there if you feel called to it. And now here is your episode with Kehla G. She's so incredible. I'm so excited for you to listen. Welcome to the Inspired Focus podcast. This is your host, Jamie O'Connor. And I'm really excited about today's episode because I have been following my guest today on Instagram for a little while now. And we started having some really awesome conversations over Instagram because of our joint love of the gene keys. And she has brought so much wisdom to my world in my own contemplation of the gene keys that I knew I needed to bring her on and introduce what she is talking about to everyone who listens to my podcast and is in my world. And she just recently released a really cool tool that is basically translating your gene keys into how to run your business. And because you all know, I love entrepreneurship. I love supporting entrepreneurs. This was so valuable. I had to get it. And I'm excited for her to be able to talk about that today and what this is all about. It's so amazing. Kehla G is a 6'2" sacral generator. So I relate. I'm a sacral generator myself as a 5'1", but my husband is also a line 6'2". So many things that I can relate to in what she does. She's a spiritual mindset coach. She specializes in working alongside entrepreneurs with their embodiment of the human design and gene keys and really showing them how to deeply trust themselves. She also has an incredible podcast that has over 295 episodes and more than 75 interviews. And I'll make sure that that's in the show notes, but let's just get into it. Kehla, welcome so much. Thank you for being here.
I'm so excited to be here, and thank you for that amazing introduction. And yeah, just the sacral juices are flowing right now. Like we had a little pre-chat. Now we're diving into the thing. It's just going to be a great conversation.
I love it. I'm so excited. So human design and gene keys, I think, can be really overwhelming when you first learn about it and you first like go pull up your chart and you're like, what in the heck is happening here? I think what would be amazing is for us to just kind of first start with like, what exactly is it, and how did you even like stumble upon the world of it, and then really simplifying it, because you do a really good job of introducing it to people in a way that helps make it make sense.
Thank you. Yeah, I can share how I found it, and then I'll share a little bit more about, I'll give a quick intro to like what human design is, and
Yeah.
then how Gene Keys relates to this. So
Yeah, perfect.
I started my business in January 2019, and I started as a mindset coach. And just to kind of zoom through to the point of when I discovered human design, it was in the summer of 2019, but it like my friend had randomly shared in her stories, oh, I'm a projector. And I'm like, oh, what am I? So the way to find your human design is your birth time, location, and date. And you can just go on Google. I use Genetic Matrix, but that's how you can look up your chart. So I go and I look my chart up, and I'm a 6-2 sacral generator. And when you look this up for the first time, you're going to see this body graph and all these numbers and symbols and channels and these centers and like shapes and sizes. And it's like, what the fuck is this?
Yeah,
And
totally.
so for me, it was like really overwhelming. I was like, oh, this is cool. I'm just going to leave it. Like, I don't have the capacity to dive into it. But then it kept coming up. It kept coming up. It kept coming up. And then late 2020, I decided, okay, I'm getting into this. And so 2021, I did a 9-month certification program. And that's when I learned about the Gene Keys and human design. And that's when I shifted from being a mindset coach to like a spiritual mindset coach, and specifically working with entrepreneurs and embodying this work in their business so they can show up authentically. They can find what works for them, sustainability, and just being in alignment, not just from like a mindset perspective of like having your thoughts aligned with what you want, but energetically realizing, oh, this is why I'm frustrated. This is why I feel bitter. This is why I'm initiating when I could be responding. Like there's so many different factors to bring into it. So that's when I discovered human design and then Gene Keys. I'll talk more about Gene Keys in a minute, but that was my initial experience, was like it found me, and then I was like, oh, you're fun, I'm gonna leave you for a little bit. And then it kept coming back. And I feel like this is literally the story of every person
Everyone.
that discovers who discovers human
Yeah.
design, and they're like, it found me, and then I was like, you're too complicated, but it kept coming back. So that's really how I discovered human design, and I love it. And I feel like, looking at it from a human design lens, like I have a lot of openness in my chart, which means that I have a lot of fluidity, the way that I experience energy, the way I think, the way that I speak. And so I think that this is what allows me to really help simplify the system and like leverage it in a different way, and really share this with people and have it be like understandable and easy to remember and apply and so on.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I had a very similar experience of it coming up several times and being around several different people that talked about it, and people like I would be speaking at an event, somebody else would be speaking at an event that was like really into human design and would pull up my chart, or I'd be working with a coach in a container and they'd be really into it and they'd be like really wanting me to know more about my human design. And every time I'd look at the chart and I'd be like, I don't understand what is happening there. Like too much. I can't do it. And like, then the more I would get the bits of knowledge and the bits of information, I was like, oh man, this makes sense. I'm starting to like, and I've always been one of those people who loves like personality tests and understanding the core of who I am psychologically and all of those pieces, and probably for a long time used it as a crutch, as I think most people do, and have learned how not to, which is also probably why I was like, I don't need another one of those things. Like, really, I've gotten to know myself pretty well. Like, I know what I do with that stuff. I don't need another one of those things. And then I went down the Gene Keys rabbit hole and I was like, oh, this is so interesting. Like, this talks about shadows. This talks about the parts of you that maybe you don't want to face so much. And like, what are the gifts on the other side of it? And that was where I was like, oh, I got to learn this. This is super interesting.
So human design, I told you how to look your chart up. And I'll just say this really quick because some people, right away, they're going to hit the barrier of like, I don't know my birth time.
Mm.
And so it does matter. The birth time does matter. But what we'll include in the show notes is I have a post you can look at on Instagram, and it will tell you how to find your birth time intuitively with the pendulum.
Oh,
So that's
cool.
a way that so you can find your
Awesome.
birth time that way. And also if you're getting a reading with someone and they can look up a couple different times, ask you a couple questions and like confirm what would probably resonate the most with you. That's another way that you can do it. But basically, when you get to the point of having your chart, what human design is that it's a synthesis of multiple systems that have come together that will create your body graph. So we have astrology, we have the Kabbalah tree, we have quantum mechanics, we have the chakra system. All of this has come together to create the human design system. And one of the really big things when you're looking at the human design system, you're going to see different shapes, which are known as centers. There's channels, which are the lines connecting the centers. And in those centers are numbers. And those are what we call gates. So there's 64 gates in the human design system. And this is part of the 64 hexagrams of the I Ching divination text, which is like
Mm-hmm.
historically like years, thousands of years old. And so the gene keys are also derived from the 64 gates in the human design chart. But when you look at the human design chart, obviously there's so many layers, right? And the gene keys, we take 11 planets consciously and unconsciously defined from your human design chart, and it creates 3 sequences that become your golden path, which are your gene keys. So each gene key is the same as the gates in human design. They have a shadow, a gift, and a city, which are like the 3 frequencies or 3 levels of consciousness that we experience. And in the gene keys, you go through these pathways and these experiences of these different themes in your life, and it tells you how these energetic frequencies show up. And what you do in order to really live this is you contemplate it. So this is the beauty of the gene keys, is that it's about the art of contemplation. It's much more feminine, where human design is more masculine driven. It's like, okay, this is your type, this is your strategy, this is your authority.
Mm-hmm.
It's more rigid, but the embodiment of your design is actually very feminine, right? But with the
Mm-hmm.
gene keys, it's much more contemplative. And the art of contemplation, which is so critical for leveraging the gifts of the gene keys, is it's really about like contemplation is in between a meditation and concentration. Contemplation is like thinking about, it's about being curious, it's about being gentle, it's about inquiring, it's about being, patient with the process. And so this is really when you look at your gene keys and you look at the different gene keys that you have and the gifts, the shadow and the frequency, and you're like, well, how does victimization show up in my life?
Mm-hmm.
How does impatience show up in my life? Like it's more of a curious standpoint rather than like needing to find one answer. Like it's always going to be unfolding the way that we contemplate the gene keys. And so the way that I've brought this into business is that the 3 different sequences in the gene keys, I've really layered onto how we can experience entrepreneurship. So I can dive a little bit into that. I'm starting to go off on a tangent here, but I just want to be sure. Do you think that brings clarity to like, hey, the human design system, and this is how the gene keys
Yeah.
derive from that?
Yeah, I love the idea of actually thinking about it in kind of that structure versus fluidity way. And that's probably part of why I really started to latch on to the gene keys, because when this came into my world, I was like craving fluidity. Like I was craving a place of learning how to contemplate versus like finding the answer, and being able to allow those things to fall into my life versus like digging and being like excavating. And that to me is one of the really beautiful things about, honestly, both of them, but gene keys like kind of providing a structure that allows you to be in contemplation, which is really
Yes.
cool. Um, and then knowing, so I think maybe let's talk a little bit about from the human design perspective, kind of going through like, okay, you have a type and your lines and then channels and what those mean for you, so that when somebody looks at it, they can say, okay, like for me, the 2 things that made the biggest difference of understanding right off the bat, and like all I needed to know before I really wanted to dive deeper into the channels and the gates, was what it means to have my type and what my lines meant and why that was important to me. Like those 2 things started to be like, oh, okay, this is why I feel frustrated, or how that shows up in my life, or those little pieces. Like when I learned that I was a 5-1, so much made sense to me. I was like, oh, heretic investigator. Oh, this is why everyone thinks I should be on stage and I really just want to be at home reading a book. Like, this is why these things, like, people see me doing all of these big things. And I often am like, no, but I don't really want to do that. I just want to go learn, like, until I'm ready. It just made all of these things that I'd been questioning about myself for so long made sense.
Yes. Okay. So I'll definitely give a little summary of the human design side. And I forgot to mention this, and I want to say it because I always want to give credit to the source. So Ra Uru Hu is the founder, creator, like synthesizer of the human design system, and Richard Rudd, who actually worked with Ra,
Yeah.
created the gene keys. So I just wanted to I realized I forgot to say that. I think, okay, if I'm going to share about this work, I need to acknowledge the source.
I love that.
So
I love that place of
yeah.
integrity. I think that's so important to me. And so I really appreciate it too.
Yeah. Okay. So with human design, when you look up your chart, there's 5 different types. And each type is like its own archetype. Okay. There's going to be a certain aura, there's going to be a certain flavor of how you're designed to show up in the world. With every type, there's going to be a strategy in terms of how you're meant to take action or respond or co-create with your business, with your life, your relationships, all of it. And then we have our authority, which is how we make decisions that are best and most aligned for us. And then we have our signature, which is when we're taking aligned action, we're going to feel like, for example, myself and Jamie are sacral generators. We're going to feel satisfaction. When we're doing the shit that lights us up, like we are satisfied. And so that's going to tell you like, okay, I'm following my design. The not self theme is going to tell you when you're not following your design. So for example, Jamie and myself are going to feel frustration. That's like when we're doing things we don't want to be doing, or we're not allowing ourselves to rest because we're sacral generators, like that's going to show up for us. And then the other aspect that you mentioned was the profile. So for example, you mentioned at the beginning of this episode, I'm a 6-2 sacral generator and you're a 5-1. So the profile is like the costume that you're wearing in the stage of life that you're living and acting and showing up in. So, for example, for yourself, when you're talking about being a 5-1, like I've connected with so many 5-1s. I don't know if it's like a 6-2 5-1 like magnetization, but the 5-1, like you said, the heretic and the investigator, it's also known as the mentor or the hero. Like those are other like synonym terminologies for the 5th line, but it's like somebody who like has the solutions. Like not you're going to want to go and investigate. You're going to there's going to be the shadow side of like I don't know enough. I need to know more like all the time. But then there's the people that are like, but you have the solutions, like come and share, like give me the answers, right? So it's really interesting, that contrast, right?
Yeah.
And then for myself as a 6-2, the 6th line is, so there's only 6 lines that we play with. There's 12 different profiles, but there's 6 lines. So I'm a 6-2. So the 6 is the last line. And for me, it's like, it's what they call being on the roof. So it's like, I am somebody who will show up more as a teacher or visionary who's like, okay, what's next? So the way, for example, that I share about the gene keys is like, oh, here's the gene keys. Okay, well, how are we going to like take this to the next level and like use this in business and really be able to support people in the most authentic way possible? And then the 2 line for me is like, it's known as the natural or hermit. So it's like, I love to go and learn on my own and I will naturally pick things up, but it can be hard for me to see myself because that's the unconscious side. So for you, you're naturally going to be so good at investigating and figuring things out, and people will see that about you before you really see that about yourself. And then for me, it's like I will just naturally pick things up. Like the way that I share about human design and gene keys is like very natural. Like I don't know how I do it, but it just happens. And people see that in me. So that second line expression is always going to be this unconscious experience, that how you unconsciously experience yourself. But then you're going to be more connected with that first line. So I'm like, hey, yes, I'm a visionary, I'm a teacher, I see this, I'm on the roof. And for you, you're like, hey, like I'm here to guide, I'm here to be a leader, I'm here to make an impact, right? So all of these things are going to be more consciously expressed and aware compared to that unconscious line. So that's another aspect that you could just even contemplate your profile and look at your whole life and be like, oh my God, look at this, makes so much sense, right?
I feel like the profile to me was where I was like, oh, ding, 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 ding. And watching my husband as a 6'2" manifester is so interesting once I learned about that, because I see him now, right? He's 43 and he's like in this like final stage where I see him like really like gathering like the final things where I'm like, oh my God, I like can't wait to see what happens when he gets to 50 and like what he's going to do to serve the world. Because it's like, I can just like see it happening in him right now. Like see him in the final stages of like all of the things, the wisdom that is like being built up. And it's like, so interesting. He probably gets really annoyed with me like talking about, but it's also cool to see him like he's a real estate agent, right? Like there's 10 bazillion real estate agents, but when he's really in his place, he's coming up with like the coolest ideas and like doing like things totally differently than what anyone else does. And when he's doing that, he's so excited. And when he's like following the crowd of what everyone else says you're supposed to do, he's so miserable. And I'm like, oh, that's the manifestor in you. And he's like,
for
okay.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my God, the initiating. As soon
Yeah.
as you said that, I was like, obviously he's here to initiate.
Yeah.
That makes so much sense.
Yeah, totally. It's fun. Yeah, so that's perfect. I mean, and just so anyone who's listening or watching, it is a lot. Like I'm about 2 years into this journey too, and of contemplation. And what I would say to anyone is just allow it to show up for you. Like just allow it to show up. Like if this is your first time hearing and what Kehla's saying is starting to be like, oh, this is interesting, just allow it. Like go look at your profile. And then when people show up on your Instagram or you follow Kehla, like just take in the knowledge and let it like come up for you as it comes, because there's so much to it and there's so much depth. And I have really experienced that the things I need to know show up when I need them.
Yes, it's so true. And I think the other thing I forgot to mention too is like we talked about looking up your human design. And if you want to look up your gene keys, you can go to the Gene Keys website. It's the same way that you would look up your human design, birth time, location,
Yeah.
date. And I think one of the biggest things, like I love that you just brought up about letting things show up. Like when you start to look at your human design chart, or you start to look at your gene keys and you're like, what the fuck is this? And especially the words too. When we look at the shadow, gift, and city of each of the gates or each of the gene keys, it's like what does this mean? Like what is like, you know, veneration even mean? Like there's some really interesting words that you're going to see, but I think what happens is that people get caught up in like the literal definition. And sometimes I find when I look up a synonym, or I look up, okay, this is the planet that it's with, this is the line expression, this is, you know, the sequence that it's in the gene keys, and it's like this is how is this showing up in this area of your life, right? So it's like there's always so much depth, and I think people get stopped on like the one word, and it's like, no, just be curious about it. Like you're meant to pull it apart and play with it and like taste it and so on.
Yeah, totally. I think when we get into looking at my chart, we can talk about some of that, because I can talk about some of the places that I've gotten caught up and then been like, oh, it starts to just like unfold into where it means in my life.
Totally. Actually, this is kind of impromptu, but I could just bring up your Gene Keys chart and
let's do
also
it.
just like,
let's do it. I feel like that's a good way. So anyone who's listening on the podcast, we're going to bring up my chart so you can go check it out on YouTube, but we'll talk it through too so you can listen.
Yes. Yeah. So basically right now we have the screen up. So when you look up your own gene keys, you're going to see like all these little balls and then these lines and the connecting the balls, or the spheres is what we call them. And there's going to be words, there's going to be numbers, and you're going to see different colors. And so I'm just going to kind of give an overview. And right now we're looking at the version that's on Genetic Matrix, because this is the system that I use, but you can go onto the Gene Keys website. Highly recommend the Gene Keys website. There's so many free resources on there. And you can also see more aspects of your gene keys as well, and just kind of toggle and be able to like, you know, remove things or add things so that you can not be so overwhelmed. But basically, when you're looking at your gene keys chart, you're going to be seeing 11 different spheres, and these spheres are pulled from the 11 planets of your human design chart to create these 3 sequences. The first sequence, which is usually in green, is the activation sequence. And this is like your physical experience in the 3D world. These are like the common challenges that you're going to experience consciously and unconsciously. And the way that I relate this to business is like, this is literally how you create core stability in your business. It will be the common themes of challenges that you will see in your business. So you can look at this, contemplate this, and then what I love to do is like, how can you use your human design to then embody how you're designed to take aligned action with consideration of these common themes that show up. And then we go into the second sequence, which is the Venus sequence. And this is all about opening up your heart. It's all about relationship, unconditional love. It's all about the unconscious inner child wounding that we receive. And once you really get into this, you're going to see that there's going to be energetic imprinting from certain age groups, from like 0 to 7, 7 to 14, 14 to 21. And then we lead into the Pearl sequence. But in the Venus sequence, I love to relate this to business in the sense that it's like, how can you really open up your heart more to connect with the people that you're working with? Whether that's your audience, your clients, whether that's your team, how you hire people, looking at certain woundings or patterns of behavior that come up in your relationships and how you communicate. Like, all of this is here for you to notice these themes so that you can then take aligned action and really have compassion for yourself and open up yourself more to connect deeper with people, especially if you're a freaking business owner. That's like the main point, is connecting with people. And then we come into the Pearl sequence, which is the final sequence, which is in blue. And this sequence is all about prosperity. This is all about, and it's not just prosperity like how the fuck you're going to make money. It's actually about how you're going to collaborate with people, how you're going to be of service, and actually redefine what wealth and prosperity mean to you. And so this is something that I've really been pulling deep into my own business of like, how can I be more collaborative with my people and be inclusive and be accessible and like connect with my fractal line and like really get clear on my brand and how I'm supposed to work with others. Like this is like a very entrepreneurial sequence naturally in itself. So those are like the 3 pathways. And it's not like you just, contemplate one sphere and then you never experience it again. Like these are constantly, this is like a hologenetic profile. It's constantly happening. It's always, it may look flat on your screen, but it's always showing up. It's always fluctuating. So that's just, I just wanted to give that little explanation of like the sequences and then how it applies to business.
I love that. That's great. I mean, I know I spent a long time with my activation sequence, like probably a good year. I was like really in it, and really like I would go read in his books about my life's work or about my evolution and just stay with those 2 for a long time. And how are they showing up and what does it mean? And then move on. And then I'd go back, and it was like this kind of over evolving, letting it show up in my life. And it was such a beautiful experience in a time where I was making a really big transition as a business owner. I was really unhappy in what I was doing in my previous business. I was super successful, and I'd done like, I looked at my vision board and I was like, oh, everything that's there is in my life and I'm fucking miserable. So this is awesome. Like, great. And that's when this showed up in my life. And it was like that contemplation really helped me. So like for me, the evolution and the life's work together were so interesting, because what I really came to at that time in my life was that, so my shadow in my evolution is deafness, and with the gift of insight, and my life's work gene key is the shadow of complexity with the gift of simplicity. And that showed up for me as a deafness to my intuition, and really, really living in a very much more masculine energy versus feminine energy, and really like feeling like I had to prove myself all the time and ignoring a big depth of intuition, and opening myself up to that and being willing to like look at life in a very different way. And then I would start to like shed this need to create complex systems about stuff and just be in trust and be in a place of that and be able to embody that. And it was like just a massive transformation for me.
I love this. I love that you're giving such a great example of how you can see this in your business and just
Mhm.
like your realization of, one of the things I love is like, I'm going to give the example of, and I love that on the screen right now we have your human design chart and then we have the
Yeah,
gene keys. Cause like, I bring these two together
love
like
it.
hardcore. And so we have 23 and 43 are the ajna connecting to the throat, right? So your ajna is all about your beliefs, your perceptions, how you see things, your conceptualization, and the throat is obviously self-expression. And the other thing that I like to consider too is that that channel is a projected channel, which means that it needs to be invited to share the wisdom. So when you're
Mm.
experiencing the gift of simplicity and insight, it's like you're going to be you're going to have this clarity and this knowing and mental awareness and certainty, but it's when you're invited to share it at the right time that you're going to make the biggest impact and you're really going to be heard. So I'm curious how that lands for you in terms of like when we consider also from a gene keys lens, like that pathway between your life's work. So your life's work and your evolution are your conscious sun and your conscious earth. So that
Mm.
pathway is known as the pathway of challenge. So
Right.
it's like you probably experienced these challenges, like you said, of like you shared beautifully deafness and complexity, how you weren't, listening to yourself. Like the ajna is a mental awareness center, right? So it's so crazy how you're sharing this. And then I'm like able to share a little bit more. And I'm curious how that
Yeah.
little observation lands for you.
Well, it's super interesting because when I was with my last business, I had gone through this period of time where I'd spent so much money on people, operations consultants and systems consultants, and doing all this stuff inside my business to like get myself out of working all the time and putting out fires and all of these things. And right in this time frame, when I was discovering this, was when I had hired somebody that ended up being this incredible mentor. And he basically came to me after 3 weeks of like looking inside my business and figuring out where the problems were and why I was so stressed out. He was like, so the problem's you. Uh, and we need to work on your leadership. And it all kind of like unfolded together. And it was like I saw how I had created so much complexity because I needed to feel important. I needed to feel like I was the one that was like in it all. And when I could like shed that and be like, oh, okay, I can take this weight off and I can like allow it to be a lot simpler. I went from like constantly putting out fires and being super attached to people that really weren't serving me to like being able to have brunch with my husband in the middle of a Wednesday. It was like amazing. And it all unfolded. And I can like, at the time, I didn't really know this stuff yet, but it was like happening and I was stepping into more of it. And so, yeah, I mean, it lands a lot. And now as I'm really embodying more of my purpose and what I'm serving people in, I'm noticing it come back up again, right? Because I'm noticing that invitation to share. And when I get the opportunity to share my gifts with a group or with people, I'm so much more lit up by it than if
Yeah.
I'm just trying to push it or share it by myself. Um, and that's a really interesting experience.
Yes. You know what I find fascinating is that what you were just sharing around this like need to be seen and like, you know, recognized and so on, like that's kind of the shadow side of the five line. So like in your life's
Mm,
work and your evolution, there are five lines. The shadow side of the five line is like really craving power from this place of like manipulation or like needing to be seen or being in control. But then when you dropped that, suddenly you get seen as a mentor and as a leader and then you're given the space to make an impact rather than trying to force an impact.
yeah.
So I was like listening to you and I was like hearing that and I was like that's so fascinating, right?
Mm,
And even just like it's so interesting because when you look at when we go from we're going to kind of go through the activation sequence. I feel like this is really cool how you're giving life experiences and then I can kind of take us through. So when you
perfect.
go from the evolution sphere to the radiant sphere, which is your unconscious sun, that pathway is known as a breakthrough. So when you really get settled in this realization of like this, the gifts of simplicity and insight, and even having, that level of epiphany and this realization, you're going to have this breakthrough where your radiant sphere is like how you're physically designed to embody this energy so that you can create core stability to really unlock your purpose. So the radiant sphere is, I find this interesting because like this is a part where some of the words that people are like, what does this mean? I thought, why is desire a bad thing? Because desire is the shadow of Gene Key 30. But the thing is, desire, the way I explain this to people is that it's coming from a place of scarcity. It's like in this insatiable, I need more, give me more, this isn't enough. But lightness, which is the gift, is about recognizing, okay, well, I'm always going to have desires. And they don't have to mean anything. They don't have to be heavy. They don't have to be, this massive, just drain. And then the city of rupture or rapture, which people are like, what the fuck? Again, this is why I look up synonyms, right? Because people are like, what does this even mean? Rapture is like this enlightened state, this all encompassing. So it's like you're going to have desires, you're not going to have desires. Your desires are going to change. Like there's just allowing for this fluidity. And so the one line is you having the space to be in solitude and reflect so that you can feel physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually like in your body and have that stability so that when we go through the last pathway down into the purpose sphere, which is your unconscious earth, that's a pathway of core stability. You're going to come into Gene Key 29, which is all about, alchemizing, doing things half-heartedly or half-assed and coming into being committed and devoted, right? And so all of those four spheres are like your foundation that I like to say to your business. Like, how are you? And also, just so people know, if you're into human design, your activation sequence is your incarnation cross in human design. So it's those 4 planets. But what I find interesting is like the incarnation crosses are sometimes like really elusive and confusing. But when you start to talk through the 4 freaking spheres and planets from a Gene Keys lens, people are like, oh my God, this makes way more sense.
Yeah.
So it's like you alchemizing complex things, not listening to your intuition, really having these desires from a place of scarcity and doing things half-heartedly. Like the deep foundation of your business is looking at how can I show up and embody myself as a sacral generator, responding and co-creating the things that light me up so that I can show up committed. I can show up with this lightness, this ability to breathe. I can show up with insights to inspire people and then bring simplicity to what it is that others are doing. So I'm curious if that resonates with you.
Oh my gosh, so much. Like I can reverse engineer that into the experiences I've had in the last 2 years, stepping into work that I get off calls with clients and I'm like blown away by how good I feel. Or I wake up in the morning, I'm just so excited for the day, where I very explicitly remember October of 2020 waking up and being like, I fucking hate my life. I have a beautiful new baby. I have a business doing, I was on the path then to about $750,000. I had, 5 employees and incredible clients. And like, I think in January of 2021 landed a Fortune 500 company as a client. Like I was doing all of the things I thought I wanted, that desire piece, like that I really believed were going to make me feel important and make me feel seen and put me on the level that I craved in this like interesting way. And I was like deteriorating from the inside while that was happening. And the half-heartedness was showing up all over the place. Like I just could not get myself to do anything I needed to do for the business. I was so like everything felt like pulling teeth. And I've had this experience in the last 6 months where content just flows out of me, and like building landing pages and doing stuff for my business just like flows out of me right now. And these are things that I like had to find people to pay to do in my last business because I hated doing it. I hated everything about what I was doing. And I was just really, truly half-hearted about it. And now it just happens. Like it's just in flow. It's just here. And I like love what I'm doing so much. And it's all so connected. And I really feel like that the journey of actually being willing to own the things I really loved and let go of that desire to be seen as someone important is actually opened it up to, I mean, just yesterday, I led a breathwork session that was like this really beautiful experience. And the feedback, and I was just so in it. Like I was just there to serve. I was just there to help guide this group of entrepreneurs through a journey into some, self-realization work and transformational work and letting go of things from last year. And the feedback was so beautiful. And it was like not ego boosting, but it was like, wow, I'm really powerful. And this is a really cool experience. And it felt really light, which was so the opposite of like when I would speak on stage, because I was, I taught Facebook ads, and I would just feel drained and kind of gross and like a little bit miserable.
Yeah. Oh my God, this is so good. I'm like listening to you, and then I'm obviously looking at your gene keys, and I'm just like, yep. So it's funny because 30 is found in the emotional solar plexus, and that's all about your emotional awareness, like your emotional processing.
Mm,
And so it's so interesting, like emotionally, this is what, if you don't have that space to like reflect and connect with yourself in that solitude, then the emotional, you're just going to have this emotional experience of not having this lightness. There's the heaviness, right? And then what I thought was so interesting, we were talking about your purpose and being lit up about things you're doing. Your purpose sphere 29 is found in the sacral. And
mm,
because you're a sacral generator, you're designed to do the things that lights you up. So when you do, it becomes flowy, it becomes easy. You're like energized by it, right? And so it's so interesting how the line one, so the 29.1, physicality is like the line one always has to do with, like, we talked about the investigated aspect earlier, but it also has to do with the safety and security foundation. So it's like, when you get that core stability from like, okay, I can emotionally process that 30th gene key. I'm like with myself. I'm connected with myself. I'm feeling lightness. You're going to have that core stability where you're going to feel safe and secure to do the things that lights you up and find that rhythm and be able to have that commitment and devotion. So I was just listening to you and I was like, oh my God, like this is why I'm like literally obsessed with this work, because it shows up. It shows up
yeah.
in business. But see, you sharing this journey of we're talking about the activation sequence, and it's like you contemplating this, you seeing these energetic frequencies show up in your experience is the biggest thing with the activation sequence is your foundation of your business. Like it is
Yeah.
like your core stability overall, so that you can then open up your heart. Because like you can't, if you think about any kind of relationship in life, especially when you start dating someone and you don't really know them, you don't really trust them, you need to develop a fucking core stability in the relationship
Mm-hmm.
in order to open up and be like, oh, yes, we do want to be lifelong partners. Yes, we do want to have kids. Yes, we do want to live here. Yes, we do want to do that. But like that foundation needs to be there first. And this is why I love the Gene Keys, because it's like, this is your foundation. I'm not going to come on here and say like, oh, this has been my experience in business. This is what you need. This is why I love human design and gene keys, because it's like I'm showing you or talking to you about your energetic experiences, not mine, and saying this is what worked for me, so this is why you should do it.
Yeah.
Right? This is like the inclusivity, and like I could have another podcast interview on someone else's channel, look at their gene keys, and we'd have a very different conversation,
Yep.
even if we're talking about the activation sequence.
Yeah, totally. It's so personalized. And it honestly, for me, similarly, I love it for so many reasons, because I am such a big believer. And I think we probably share a lot of similar ideas around this, but that there's a huge problem in the coaching industry of these like one size fits all approaches that people take. They go get a certification and here's some solution, some inner child work or something, whatever. And we are such unique individual beings with our own deep purposes. And this brings an aspect to be able to get to know yourself, as long as you're not using it as a crutch. Oh, I am this way because, but actually more of, I can explore how to become the best version of myself because I understand these shadow pieces. I understand what the gifts could be when I step into them and walk through the fire of understanding my shadows and how they're showing up in my life and turn them into the gifts. Like it's a really beautiful tool to be able to do that.
Yes. And what I love so much that we haven't mentioned yet about human design and the gene keys is that your shadows, like there's shadow work all over the internet. Like this is, do your
Yeah.
shadow work, get rid of your shadows, whatever. It's not, you literally cannot get rid of the shadows. Like if you had not experienced
No.
complexity, depthness, desire, and half-heartedness in your life or business, you wouldn't even know how to alchemize that energy into having simplicity, insight, commitment, and lightness. Like we literally need the shadows. And this is something that I think shifted me the most when it came to human design and gene keys is I was like, oh, this is literally the fucking tool to eliminate any form of self-rejection. It's
Yeah.
literally the tool to show us how to have a full human experience and allow ourselves to be in the shit when things aren't going well, when things are going sideways, because it's constantly a redirection. But if we were just always flying high all the time, like, that's just not sustainable.
No.
And it makes me laugh when I talk about this because my life's work is compassion.
Yeah.
It is humanity. It's gene key 36. It's like turbulence. It's found in the emotional solar plexus. Like this is why the way I talk about things, I'm so fucking transparent about the turbulence of it, the humanity of normalizing all entrepreneurial journeys, because this is just what's needed in the world for everyone to thrive, and having that compassion of like when you are still frustrated and pissed off and angry and disappointed about your experience as an entrepreneur, like how can you have compassion for yourself? You're building something that you didn't even know. It's just this desire in your heart that you want to bring to life, and like give yourself some fucking compassion for not knowing what the fuck you're doing and figuring it out as you go along. So it's
Yes.
just like we need the shadows. It's never a conversation of how do I get rid of this. I need to like go up the emotional scale or do some Abraham Hicks like spiritual bypassing. Like I mean that was like a very toxic example, but that can happen, right? This isn't
Totally.
about spiritual bypassing.
No, it's about actually embracing and embodying all of the parts and recognizing that they all have something to serve, and there's something really beautiful on the other side of them. I use an analogy I talk about a lot. I'm sure people who actually listen to all the episodes, they're like, okay, we've heard that one before. But I use this analogy that works really well for this, which is, when we're little, let's just say 5 or 6, we're given a hammer and we're only taught how to break glass or how to hurt someone with that hammer. And so we start to like put it in the closet and we don't want to look at it and we don't want to take it out, and it scares us. And every time it shows up, we're like, I hate that hammer. But then we start to like see other people using hammers in a totally different way. And we're like, wait a minute, I'm missing something, because I was just never given the tools or the understanding. And in Gene Keys, this is just part of our journey, right? Like we were purposely, for some reason that is beyond our knowing, not given the ability to use the hammer the way that is going to serve us the most until we're ready to know. And then we start to learn, right? Then we start to understand that the hammer can actually be used to build the house around us that will give us the safety we were always looking for. And it is actually the most beautiful tool, the most beautiful gift that we could have ever had. But it takes the journey, it takes the experience, it takes the knowledge, the knowing that it can be used in a shadowy way. And what were the lessons that came out of that can show us how to use it in the best possible way that brings us to the highest place that we can.
Yes. That was a great analogy. That was so good.
I'm gonna do a TED Talk on it someday.
So good.
Yeah, so interesting. I think the Gene Keys have so much potential to guide people in a really loving way. Like Richard Rudd talks a lot about grace, and I think that's so important, especially in the spiritual coaching world. There's so much shame. There's so much shame that is like, I think there's a lot of danger that happens around the ideas of manifestation and around all of these things of like, you've created this for yourself in some kind of negative way. And there's this beautiful path that can exist where we can look at, it doesn't have to be like that. And there's like really amazing gifts underneath.
Yeah. That's one of the things I really loved about Richard Rudd and the way he teaches the gene keys, and just like my own experience with it is that like it has brought so much grace in terms of, like I said, that compassion and that just like that really giving ourselves the space and also just slowing down. Like the gene keys is a slow burn. It's a slow fucking burn.
Slow. Yeah. I mean, I'm still like, so in my Venus sequence, I'm kind of in contemplation of my Venus sequence right now. And I swear the way it has worked for me, and everyone is different. Like everyone I know has handled the way that they look, that has studied the gene keys, has done it in their own way. And it's beautiful. For me, I strangely, because I'm not a very linear person in the rest of my life, but the gene keys have showed up very linear for me. It's been very like, I've just kind of like followed it. And when I try to jump ahead, it's like my brain just doesn't absorb it. Like there's just nothing there for me to actually take in, and nothing makes sense. And then I'm like, all right, well, I guess I have to go back. And then I'm back to like some other sphere. And it's been the experience again with the Venus sequence. Like I am supposed to stay with my spiritual quotient for a longer period of time and really like allow the things to show up of how my shadows are showing up or where my gifts are in them and how that is. And I'm like seeing these moments of gifts more and more and more in that all the time. And it's really beautiful. And I mean, on my chart, I think it's my spiritual quotient and I think my SQ and my IQ are the same.
Yeah, your SQ and your IQ are the same.
Yeah.
Yep,
So
21.
That's also been like a really interesting mindfuck for me, because I've been like, wait, what is happening? And I'm like, oh yeah, really? Control? That's shocking. That's really shocking that one's.
I really loved bringing your chart up today and like having a visual example for people to like see, and just like you sharing your story and then me capitalizing. Like that was like so good. I really enjoyed that. I'm like so excited to share this with people. And even just like you being able to share your own experience of contemplating, like that's the thing, is that for people to know, like there's no right or wrong way. You don't do the gene keys, first of all. You don't do the gene keys. You contemplate them, and you even shared your own experience. Like you don't have to go through them linearly. Like, yes, Jamie and I went through the activation sequence first today, but if you feel called, I actually started in the Pearl sequence because I needed to work on my money shit and really redefine my relationship to prosperity. And then I went through everything else. And that's actually, now I'm going through the Venus sequence, doing the Venus sequence retreat. And it's like contemplating each of the spheres over 6 months. And it's like, I'm really diving deeper into that. It's like what you feel called to, right? But for you, you're noticing energetically, intuitively, like, hey, I need to do this linearly, but you don't have to do it that way.
Yeah.
Even though there's pathways, it's all interconnected. So I just wanted to share that with the listeners so that, when you get into it, don't feel like there's a right way to do it, because there isn't.
I know people who have gotten the book, and like for them, just like using it like an oracle, like waking up in the morning and pulling open the book and deciding to read one of the gene keys, whether it's in their profile or not, is like what really speaks to them. And there's just so much knowledge and so much to be able to explore that you can use it in so many different ways and be able to really feel activated and aligned to it, which is so cool. And there's amazing resources like Kehla has, which, I got your business guide and I think it is so amazing. There is so much information there. So it's like such an incredible resource alongside any of the books that you can buy easily from Richard Rudd on Amazon or on his websites. But I highly recommend if you are an entrepreneur to consider it, because it really does give you some pathways to just contemplate, to start to journal, to look at how it's showing up for you, and just explore different ways to look at your business in a way that's actually going to serve you more.
Yes, I love hearing that from you and just your experience with it. And so, yeah, I actually think today's conversation was such a great segue into this. Like, I got into the Gene Keys and then I was like, oh my God, I can see the patterns in business. So I created the Gene Keys business guide. So it's a 92-page PDF, and I'm in the process of recording the 64 audios that will talk about all the Gene Keys from an entrepreneurial lens. And there's like a 64 card deck, like a PDF deck as well, that talks about every single Gene Key. And that's going to be wrapped up the end of January because it's like such a big project that I'm working on. But I created this because I wanted to simultaneously support people with understanding their Gene Keys, but then also like simultaneously having the questions and the prompts of like, how does your life to work show up in your business? Like, how does your attraction sphere bring you the relationships that you need to really create an opening of your heart in your business? Like, there's so many amazing questions in here that I think are going to help people. And what I love is that I think people are just going to actually start to trust their intuition more, rather than being like, oh, I need to do what that person's doing. It's like, oh, these are my Gene Keys, these are the questions, and these are my answers. And it's like a very independent tool. And I love this because as a 6'2", that's what we want, is like, we want to like share the wisdom with people, but then have them be independent and confident. So this is definitely going to be in the show notes. And I have a ton of other free resources as well that people can dive into, and they can check out my podcast channel, Living in Fierce Alignment. I have like probably almost 200 episodes now related to human design and Gene Keys, but there's like 300 on the channel. So there's so many goodies, so many rabbit holes to go into.
I love it. So many incredible resources. And of course, you do coaching. So if people want to actually go a lot deeper into it, they're able to work with you and have an experience like we did today, and actually get to know a little bit of that, be able to ask the questions and really talk through what this is, which is an incredible opportunity. Like, I love the way that you've built and structured your business. Obviously, you're living your design, which is so amazing. But you really brought the opportunity to for people to meet you where they are, which is awesome and is such an incredible example and a model of what we can do in business, in the coaching world. And I think you're doing it from like a very trauma-informed lens too, which I have a lot of respect for.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. So this was so beautiful. I had so much fun talking through this with you. I am obsessed with this stuff as well. So I learned so much. We're going to make sure that all of the information is in the show notes for everybody, because there's just so many resources that Kehla has, and it's so incredible. I know that you've like changed up some of the places where you are engaging with people the most. So I want to make sure, like, what would be the number one place for somebody to go and engage with you and get the information?
So one of the things I've done, and I'll just share this because I've shared it with people and it's really helped entrepreneurs with like the pressure of social media. In December, I stopped posting on Instagram. But if you go to I'm on Instagram in my stories, and I'll like be on there sharing, selling things, giving things away for free. But I'm not posting on the feed anymore, because if you want to look at visibility versus effort, it's just not sustainable. So the other things I'm doing are emails, and I'm repurposing my content in blogs, and I have the podcast channel. And so it's like, I'm still very present. I'm just not going into the Instagram hole because it's just, I feel like Instagram is not supporting their creators enough. So you can still find me on Instagram for sure. And then if you grab a freebie, you're going to be in my email list. I send an email every week, and there's like so much goodness on there. Podcasts I've done, interviews I've done, free resources, ways to work with me every week. So that's where you can find me. So thank you for allowing me to share that with everyone.
Yeah, for sure. So you can go to her Instagram and find ways to actually opt in. Is there like a good opt-in page that would be a good place to get? Okay.
I have a freebies page. Yep. and that will be in the show notes. There's 14 resources that people can download if
Perfect.
they want. So there's all related to human
Okay,
design, gene keys,
cool.
business, meditation. Yep.
Do
So good.
that. It's so worth it. You'll want to be in her world. I promise. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. This was such a fun conversation. And I'm so excited for people to be able to dive deeper into it with you.
Thank you for having me on. And thank you everyone for listening. I look forward to connecting with you.